Jason Belzer here for AthleticDirectorU, joined today by Brad Edwards, the athletic director at George Mason University. Spent almost a decade in the National Football League as a player, came in second, I believe, in MVP voting during the Super Bowl. And head men's basketball coach Dave Paulsen, who's been here for a couple of years. A unique road. Came from Bucknell and previously Williams, where he is a graduate, won a national championship on the Division III level, graduated Phi Beta Kappa, I believe, correct? And also have a master's in history from Michigan.
Right. Yes.
So a unique road for a college basketball coach, to say the least. So I'd like to start talking about how you guys came to be together here. Brad, you came in as athletic director, decided to make a move for a coaching change, and began the process of looking for a new coach. What attracted you to Dave, and what were you looking for specifically in a basketball coach?
Early on, we felt like here fit was going to be real important to us, not from a number of perspectives, from where we were currently from an infrastructure perspective, where we had been from a momentum, a number of years of performance, from recruiting geographically, where we reside in the geographical universe. And so the kind of school we are academically, those sorts of things, and the conference that we're in, all of those components were important, as well as what our history had been and the kinds of coaches that had done well here historically and conversely had not done well. And so throughout our search, all along, we and I had communicated this to our president on a number of occasions, and when Dave's name first really months before we started the official process, and I felt like his background, his academic pedigree, as you mentioned a minute ago, his progression, the style that they play, the style of basketball, the systems that they run, the way he manages a game. And we have a very educated fan base here. They had seen for many years very good coaching strategically, and so that was very important to us. And so his name popped up a number of times as I communicated to the president. I said, there are some good names in this pool, but I think the guy that you're going to go to bed at night worried the least amount about your program is probably going to be the guy from Bucknell, Dave Paulsen. And at the end of the day, that was, we got that and we got more.
What was it that made you feel so secure about Dave when you were saying that?
Yeah, his track record, number one, is certainly in the schools that he had been in, and from a compliance perspective, that's always a box that we're gonna check. I mean, it's not a huge universe, and so you can pick up. It doesn't take long to ask a few questions around and figure out, who's doing things the right way within the rules, who pushes things a little too far, who's over the edge, and that sort of thing. And right or wrong, I've just never been one of those guys. As an athlete, as a player, as a coach, or an athletic director, I've always been someone who's said, let's win the old-fashioned way, inside the rules, with hard work and expertise and systems. And so that was immediate. That came bubbled to the top. That there were no red flags through the process. And I think at times that you, as an athletic director or CEO or leader, whatever it is, anytime you coach, when you don't pay attention to red flags when they're there, is when I have typically got myself into a bad position. And so, those weren't there. The adherence to compliance, the commitment to academics. And this is the other piece, and and Dave's heard me say this many times, and I go back, we're all a little bit of a product of our own personal development. And I go back to the coaches I played for, principally Joe Gibbs, Hall of Fame coach in the NFL, and just sort of as a model for the way that whatever the sport is, I mean, it's that person whose purpose and passion is really about developing young people. And oh, by the way, I want to win too, but that's not the most important thing about what we're doing here, is developing young people and creating leaders and creating opportunities and taking maybe birds, if you will, and turning them into eagles in a way, making people better than the way they were when they got here. And so all of those were components of Dave's reputation. When you started asking people in the business, and doing that sort of human intelligence work, all of that started to bubble to the surface. And then there's the basketball acumen that just is, again, and I mentioned it a minute ago, our fan base here is very educated, and they'd seen a lot of success here in the past, and so we wanted someone that knew how to run a game, and can manage a clock and can manage timeouts, and
Sure.
and had a system in place that was maybe not foolproof. There's no foolproof system, but it was that whole package of things that and I've done 25 to 28 head coaching searches and that I've been a part of, or almost 30 now, and it's looking at that 360 group. I'm never going to be one to look at just what's the performance been in the past and then let's make a decision on that.
Sure.
It's never going to be that. It's going to be on fit and who can help you build a program.
Dave, same question, but from the opposite perspective. What attracted you to George Mason? What made you think that this is the right university to continue your career at? And also, what attracted you to Brad? What made you believe in him as a leader and somebody that was going to support the effort that you needed to become successful here?
Well, for me, I was a great place at Bucknell, and we had won 4 of the 5 previous championships. We started 3 freshmen, and we just won our regular season championship. So, that group's won 2 since we've left. So I'm like, okay, we're going to be really good. And you don't want to jump at just anything. Certainly in the time at Bucknell, somebody would call, would you be interested in this position, that position? No, I don't think so. And then when somebody said, would you be interested in George Mason? I'm like, yes. Okay, so the first attraction was, there's a Final Four banner hanging up there. And there's not too many arenas in the country that can say that. And so that it's a place where there's tradition, and that's important. We sit in the most, or one of, if not the most talent-rich areas in the country. So the proximity to good players, to good coaches, and the chance to compete, at the highest level in the Atlantic 10 Conference. So those are the things that maybe say, yeah, I'd be interested in meeting with those people. When I had a chance to meet with Brad, the things that he just mentioned about, it is not just, we want to win. Brad made that very, very clear. I don't want to go to a place where the athletic director, the president, and the community doesn't want to win. That's all I want to be at. But also understand that it's a process-driven enterprise. It's not about, we got to win tomorrow, but talking about building from the ground up. I think Brad shared a vision of the needed infrastructure that we're going to be working on in terms of facility upgrades here to the arena, practice facility that is underway, just other things to support our program so we could compete at the highest level. So that became clear. And then to me, the real selling point was when I came on campus, and in addition to more time with Brad and other members of the search committee, had a chance to meet with the president, Angel Cabrera. And he and I just hit it off. I just really liked him. I think it's so important, not only to be in alignment with your athletic director, but, that clear alignment between the president, athletic director, and men's basketball coach. We're not going to agree on everything. Brad and I don't agree on everything, and, certainly not with the president. But
pretty close,
but the sense that, we can have a dialogue, we can discuss, I don't have all the answers, Brad doesn't have all the answers, Dr. Cabrera doesn't have all the answers, but let's see if we can roll up our sleeves and work together to try to create something, that can be lasting.
How do you hold your respective teams accountable? Brad, how do you hold the administrators and coaches that you work with accountable? How do you hold your players accountable? And then how do you hold each other accountable for the things that you say and promise each other?
Well, we look at it from a 360 perspective in terms of the kinds of people they are, the kind of representatives of the university that they are, not just nationally, but here within our community and within our internal community within the university, what their commitment to academics has been, what their commitment to player development is, and player treatment, and then obviously, like we mentioned earlier, there's the whole on the court performance piece of it, but it really is that full package that in most times performance is a function of those other things being out of alignment or being neglected or not being in the proper priority or being attended to. And so so we're going to look at a full range, a full program set of criteria for evaluating coaches and holding them accountable, and where they are in their stage of their development as well. I mean, that's critical. I mean, a coach within a certain place in a certain league, some schools are set up to win in certain sports. Just, it's almost, somebody's going to have less effort or less need to develop early on and to be successful, and others are not. And so it really becomes a matter of evaluating those almost program specific and school specific.
Okay.
So for me, holding our players accountable, and I think that's always one of the bigger challenges when you're inheriting a program. And with no disrespect, to players that were here, they came to play, for a different coach, and we're very upfront in our recruiting process. Like, here's our values, here's what we're about. This is why we think you're a great fit for us, why we're a great fit for you. And if like the things I'm talking about aren't right and don't resonate with you, then don't come here to George Mason. Well, with the players you inherit, that's not necessarily the case. So I think the fine line, when you take over a program, you don't want to disenfranchise the guys who are there, and yet they have to adhere to standards that maybe they hadn't signed up for. And that's a delicate balance. And so there's been some transitional issues as we're trying to, upgrade our program, and basically, my thing is, I want to raise the level of accountability every year we're here. Raise the standards of excellence, not only on the court in terms of shooting percentages and defensive efficiency, but also in terms of just accountability. Our guys know, I think, pretty clearly we've got a certain set of non-negotiables, and we don't make punishment personal, but it happens every time, and they know, and we hold guys accountable. Our guys know if it comes down to a decision of one individual or the overall group of building a program rather than even building a team, we're going to build a program.
Sure. What about expectations? Less accountability and more expectations. How do you set out a clear set of expectations? And your experience, I mean, you've coached a national championship team. What is the definition or kind of the key characteristics of a great team?
Like, a great team is number one, you attack the game. We always talk about we're playing against the game. We're not playing against, we open up against Lafayette. We're not playing against Lafayette or VCU or anyone in between. We're playing against the game and the standards of excellence, because you can have a really, really strong team and underperform and still quote unquote win. That's not going to carry long term. And you can have a younger emerging team playing against a dominant force, and you not win on the scoreboard, but you make progress. So I think that playing against the game, embracing the process, so that you're never satisfied with your results, but you're also never demoralized or overwhelmed. I think getting guys, championship teams, whether it was a national championship team at Williams or conference championship teams at Bucknell, it's getting guys to play hard every single day. Getting guys to buy into their roles, which isn't always what they would have signed up for initially, but understanding when you give of yourself, the long-term payoff is better. They may not see it at the time, so just getting them playing selfishly, and just having a cohesive group. I think the groups that are most connected and selfless, are the ones that win. And then finally, when the players can enforce your culture, when you have an atmosphere of servant leadership, then I think, good things really take forward from there.
Sure. Brad, you spent almost a decade in the NFL, won a Super Bowl. What are the characteristics of a great organization? And talk to me about the difference that you've seen between great professional sports organizations and how that maybe applies to the collegiate level or doesn't apply.
Sure. I think certainly some of those characteristics that rise to the top in my mind are high expectations and a sense of this is the way we do things, which is at a very high level. And conversely, there is an expertise within the organization of getting things from thought to execution with a high degree of attention to detail and a low tolerance for things that aren't done the right way. And I think the same thing in how that translates on the field and with teams that are just not satisfied or coaches that are satisfied with doing things that are less than perfect and letting bad habits, sort of go unaddressed or unnoticed. And that happens. I mean, I'm amazed at the number of organizations that happens. So I think it starts at the very top within an organization where there's just a very high standard and a drive to be excellent and a drive to be great and a drive to be relevant and impactful and to be meaningful within your industry and to recruit those kinds of people and to pay extra attention to who you bring in the organization. And I think to find people administratively, organizationally, who want to compete and who love to compete. And the same thing with athletes. It's just, can you find that group that they just love to compete day in and day out? I mean, whatever ball you roll out there, they just want to compete. And getting a group together like that does that day in and day out and is willing to be coachable, willing to be selfless, that enjoys the process, that will buy into the process and gets into big games and says, this is what I live for. I mean, this is what we do, and I live to be on the line with it all on, with it all on the proverbial line to make that shot to win it all or lose it all. I mean, I think those kinds of young people and employees who just want to be better but want to do it the right way and are willing to work hard to do it. To me, that's what great organizations contain, from the New England Patriots today and Golden State and basketball and others. And
does that apply regardless of the level of the organization, whether it's a pro team or a college team or even a Fortune 500 company?
I really believe that, and I've spent time in the private sector and seen the same things and the same set of common denominators within those parameters of those that have been great and those that have just been average and pro teams. And I've played for pro teams that were very average and those that were obviously the best. And I think sometimes collegiately, and it might be because you don't have the time, you're so limited on time, particularly today with a 20-hour rule, that you have to be very smart and very strategic at how you manage what happens on the court, or on the field, relative to player development. And in the NFL or NBA or whatever, you're working 3 times that amount of time. I mean, that's the big difference. High school to college, you're pretty much spending 20 hours a week. That's about all you can spend in high school anyway, and by rule, that's all you can spend at college. All of a sudden, you go to a pro level, and you're spending 3 times that amount of time on your trade or your craft, and so you have more time to sort of drill down on those elements. And I think the same thing's true in the private sector. So it's a little bit harder, but sometimes I do see collegiately where they're sometimes coaches or administrators will just push through things that are not done exactly right, rather than going back and taking the time to say, nah, we're not moving on until this gets perfect.
Sure. What is the single most important thing that an athletic director can do to support their coaches?
Well, to support them, I think outside of getting the right people, I mean, to me, I think that's the most important thing within any organization are the people. Once you've established your purpose and you've got a set of principles and that are going to guide your behaviors to meet that purpose, then it's getting the right people. And I think having those conversations and moments of reiterating to your staff and to your coaches that I understand where you are, I understand the challenges that you face. Here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm committed to doing, here's what we've done, here's what we're going to continue to do. I have your back. I mean, I've said that more times than I can count of, hey, don't sweat it, I have your back. You keep doing this the right way, I've got your back. And I think for coaches to have that comfort that it's they can go about, like Dave said early on, to building it, constructing it the right way. And if it's building through the draft, what we call it here, versus free agents, you know what I mean, then that requires a certain amount of time and patience to do that, and to for someone to understand, I get that, and I'm with you through this process, and here's how we'll do it together. And I think communicating that we are together in alignment in this, and as long as we're both meeting those those intangibles of the relationship and the partnership, and how we treat principally how we treat our student athletes, and how we hold them accountable. Conversely, it's not a free pass. Sure. Here, and I've been one. I've raised one. We have 500 of them here, and so there's going to be accountability as well.
And I would say there's a lot of athletic directors who say they have your back.
Yeah.
And then, obviously what you do speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you say. Right. And backing that up, in fact. And so I think that's what's important from a coaching perspective, and that's what we feel fortunate we have enough here, is that, having your coach's back means you're going to engage in a dialogue, and you're going to listen and communicate and share. And so, there have been inevitable bumps in the road, and there will be more bumps in the road, but I feel comfortable saying, hey, Brad, here's what's going on. Here's what happened, whether it be with, an individual player, we're talking about accountability, or, what's going on in recruiting. And there's a level of trust and a dialogue. And I think by the same token, as a coach, we can't ask for the athletic director to have our back if we're not speaking to his face and saying, okay, here's what's going on. So I think, finding a way as a coach, to keep, in my case, to keep Brad informed. Here's what's going on, not every single second. Here's what we did the first drill and practice, but big picture, here's what's going on with our team, with our staff, with our program. It's easier for him to have his back if he's not being blindsided by anything as well.
Sure. How do you ensure that the values of your program are aligned with the values of the athletics department as a whole, and vice versa? I mean, and you as a former player, maybe a little bit differently, but I think sometimes athletic directors face a challenge of knowing when to step in and tell their coaches to do certain things, but also maybe kind of taking a back seat and saying, what, I trust them enough to do that. So,
yeah, and that's a great question, and I again, it goes back to people and relationships, and I tell particularly young people who are getting ready to engage in relationships, and I encourage them almost all the time. I align yourself with people who you have the same values with, not so much the same interest, because your interests are going to change, probably will change, but your values should be there. They should be the same. And so we athletically within the department align our values with what those are within the universities, and they have to be in alignment and mirror those. And so getting that right on the front end with the people that you bring in is probably why I always spend a little more time probably than I think some others in the hiring process, because I just want to get that right, and I know how important that is to bring in people who have the same values that you do, so that you don't have that question down the road. I mean, we don't have that. That's not a concern here. Once Dave came in and we were, had done our homework on him, that it wasn't a concern, and so you've eliminated that, off the bat and or out of the box, and so and just getting it right on the front end is mission critical.
I think, like for me, I remember this is one of the things that really, in a shorter meeting with President Cabrera, but it was Brad, myself, and Dr. Cabrera, and he said, well, tell me, a situation where we had to make a really difficult decision, and just that spring I had to suspend a player for a conference tournament game for conduct detrimental to the program, and we had won our regular season championship. We won the first round game, but then lost in the and the kid was eligible later on, but it threw our rhythm off. And, it might have cost us an NCAA tournament bid. So we went to the NIT instead of the NCAA tournament that year. And, and I wasn't prepared for the question, but, I answered it honestly. And, Dr. Cabrera loved the answer. And so I said, okay, well, this is a person, that when they know if I'm making a principled decision based on values that I think are important, if that was a problem, then I wouldn't have been offered the job, and I could tell even by his body language, like he liked the answer and we connected. So I think even, from not only athletic director perspective, but presidential level, that it was more than likely that our values would be aligned.
And Angel and I talk about it all the time, and particularly and being a part of the executive council here on the university, which I'm very fortunate to be a part of, we talk about it often in terms of letting your values drive your decisions. And anytime there's a complex issue or a gray area, if you always go back to your values, it makes it so much easier, and it takes all the guesswork out of it. And so that's what Dave described a minute ago, and what we certainly see as being the framework that guides our program going forward, is that we get in those kind of conversations, it's not going to be governed by, or those kind of decisions are not going to be governed by external factors, or they're going to be governed by what our stated values are as a university.
Sure. Dave, how do you sustain success? You took over a tradition-rich program here, but now it's your job to take it to the next level and also kind of pave your own path. So how do you manage that while also kind of paying tradition to all the great things that have happened here before you?
Well, I think, one of the things that I was fortunate, when I became the coach at Williams, I replaced my coach, who became the athletic director, who at the time was maybe the third or fourth highest winning percentage in Division III basketball history. And, and you have to, and I was a product of that tradition. So you pay respect to it, you pay respect to the values, and yet you got to put your own stamp, like this is how I do things. But that was good training. I went to Bucknell and replaced Pat Flannery, who had taken Bucknell a couple of NCAA tournaments, and they knocked off Kansas. And and so you got to be. And so of course you're going to stand on the shoulders of giants if you want to build a powerhouse. But you got to be comfortable, in your own skin. So for me, kind of every quote unquote step up the ladder, I've replaced, kind of a legend. And so, the reason I'm here is because of Coach Larinaga and that 2006 team. The reason I've heard of George Mason, most people outside of the Northern Virginia area probably had not heard much about George Mason until that Final Four run. So, it's within 30 seconds of the first phone call to a recruit that we're talking about the 2006 Final Four. Now, the problem is these kids were, what are they? They were like 2 or 4.
Don't say that.
It was really sad, But I think I want to be at a tradition-rich program, and yet because I've had the good fortune of replacing some legends. I think I have maybe a thicker skin than maybe somebody else to say, I'm not going to do everything the way Coach Larinaga did, or Coach Flannery at Bucknell, or Coach Sheehy at Williams. But it's going to be within that framework.
Sure. Brad, what happens when the day comes when Dave maybe moves on to greener pastures or decides to move on to another program.
Yeah.
How do you expect to replace him, and what are you doing now to do that, or are you thinking about that, or what's that process look like?
Yeah, I think you're always thinking about that, and two, that also has to do with where you are in the hierarchy of Division I and within college basketball, and the ideal way to or circumstances to be replacing a coach is because they did so well that they got something bigger and better ultimately, and so that's not in and of itself a bad thing. And Dave is certainly that kind of a coach, and so what you want to do is to be able to build the infrastructure in place to make sure that you're ready for not only to make your current coach as successful as they can be, but for the future. And I think our goal has been here, and I've been very clear up front with Dave, is that my intent here has been to create a legacy opportunity for him that narrows that field outside of George Mason. That creates I can stay here for the next 15 years, or it limits the universe to a number of schools that I might kick him in the shins if he doesn't go do that kind of thing. And I feel like at this point our friendship is going to be what it is for the rest of our lives. I mean, we're going to be friends, for the rest of our days, and that's going to be the most important thing that we do from here on out. And and I want the best for him. And I think when you start to try to hold on to people, and you look at it from a selfish perspective, I just think that's the wrong way to look at it. I think if I can do everything to make Dave as successful as he can possibly be, because it's the right thing to do for him, and it's the right thing to do for our kids, you can't ever go wrong doing that. And and so we'll only be in a better position, if all of those things happen.
Sure. Dave, same question, but from the opposite perspective. What would it potentially take for you to leave George Mason? And more importantly, assume you made the decision to do that, what would have happened, or what state of the program do you think you need to leave it in to say, what, I've did everything that I can, and I'm comfortable that it's better off than when I started, and it's in a good place for me to move on and for somebody else to take the reins?
Well, and this is something that I've done on a couple occasions.
Sure.
And each one of those decisions was incredibly hard. Leaving my alma mater, leaving a Bucknell place where we'd won, championships 4 out of 5 years, had a group coming back. So, and then compounded by the fact that every time you're moving a family. And one of the things for me, why you said, what about George Mason? Well, there's a Final Four banner hanging here. And there's a ton of quote unquote Power 5 conference schools where there's no Final Four banner hanging, and if it is, there's a lot of dust and cobwebs up there. Sure. And I think what Coach Larinaga and that George Mason group did, before VCU, before Butler, before Wichita State, is they pierced that glass ceiling. And so I think the world is shrinking a little bit, in terms of the haves and the have-nots. And so, I prefer to say, as Brad used the word legacy job, is this a place where we can build something that is unbelievably strong, that competes, and we're going to go to Final Four every year? I hope so, but that's not probably realistic. But I think that we can build this place to where it's a top 25 program every year, and you're doing that. Then one made free throw and a fortuitous call by an official, and you maybe are playing in a regional final or going to the Final Four. So I think one thing my father always told me, you can never take a job as a stepping stone job. It's got to have its own intrinsic value, and so I think we have everything here. And that, to me, that's all I'm focused on is, can we get it back close to that level that it was, in 2006.
Sure. Well, Dave, Brad, very insightful conversation. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jason.
Yep.